everyone, good afternoon. So for today, we will be discussing about another elements of fiction, which are the conflicts and ironies. But before that, let us see the objectives. In this lesson, we have two objectives. First one, we must discuss and explain the conflict and irony. And the second one, we must identify the different types of conflicts and ironies. So what are we waiting for? Let's get it on and keep on watching.
Good day everyone. Today I'm going to discuss one of the elements of fiction, which is the conflict. So what is conflict and how do we understand conflict in one story or in a piece? So when we heard the word conflict, what comes first in our mind? Yes, maybe it is struggle, opposing, or argument, disagreement, even fights or battle. Let me begin my discussion with a definition of conflict. Conflict is a clash between two opposing forces that creates a narrative thread for a story. It involves the struggles of the main characters or the protagonist against other forces to attain their goals. So, the main purpose of conflict is to create tension for the readers to get more interested. Let me give you some examples, some examples from the piece that I know that is familiar to you. From the movie Moana, the story of a young girl who has mission for her tribe or for her community. The conflict, there is a misunderstanding or an argument between Moana and his father, because his father did not allow Moana to approach the water because he has fear for his own implanted past. So the second conflict there is Maui and Moana fights the monster of Polynesian to restore the heart of the forest. So for them to be able to save the tribe of Moana or the community of Moana. So the second example is the Snow White, and this fairy tale is very familiar to us. So, and the conflict there is the stepmother of Snow White tries to kill Snow White for being the fairest of them all. The stepmother needs to prove to their kingdom that she is the most fairest of their kingdom, not Snow White. So that is the conflict of the fairy tale story of Snow White. The next one is from the movie By Bus, starring Ann Curtis. The conflict there is the battle between the Fidea and the drug syndicate or the drug lords. The next example is a short story from Jose Villa Garcia. This is my favorite story because it has a moral lesson for especially for the youth. It is from it is entitled Footnote to Youth. It is story of a young couple that is very stubborn and get married even in a young age. So the conflict is there is difficulties and hardship that they experience from their married life. The next one is another short story from Amador Daggio entitled Wedding Dance. It is a story of a married couple that being together for 7 years, but they are not capable of having a child of their own. Tribes have traditions that they need to obey. So the conflict there is even they love each other, they need to get separated and marry another to obey their traditions, to bear or to produce a child for the next generation. So that is the conflict, the story of the wedding dance. All conflicts falls into two different categories, the internal and the external conflict. When you say internal, it is the character struggles with their own opposing desires and beliefs. It is the character's mind over a problem or questions. It also occurs in decision-making issue. When you stuck in a situation or torn between two choices, that's when you know that you are dealing with internal conflict. For example, in the movie Moana needs to choose either she obey or disobey her father. So, for not approaching the water. So, her decision is to disobey her father for the sake of their community or their tribe. So she fulfilled her mission. So another example if you and your best friend fall in love with one girl or one boy, you are going to choose if you compete with your best friend or you just support your best friend for his or for her love life. Is the external conflict. It is it is the struggle of the character between conflicted ideas in someone or against someone. So example of this is verbal conflict with your neighbor. That is the one example of external conflict. Another example is from the movie Baybas, the battles between the FIDE and the drug syndicate. Another example is when you and best friend competing with the highest score in the exam or in the end or in the grade. That is external conflict. Another example is the verbal conflict with your parents, with your friends, misunderstanding with your best friend. That is external conflict, dealing with someone or against with someone beyond control. So that is the two categories of conflict, and both internal and external are very important for a good story because it is all part of our life. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, so let us continue and proceed to the next topic, which is about the 6 types of conflict. So, when the forces within the story moves in opposite ways or block each other, then we call it conflict. And here in our module, there are 6 types. The character versus self, the character versus character, the character versus nature, the character versus supernatural, the character versus technology, and the character versus society. And I will be discussing the first 3 types. And the first type of conflict happens within the character's own mind, and it is called character versus self. It is an internal conflict. Why it is considered as internal conflict? Because the character needs to surpass their own nature and he or she needs to conquer their inner struggle within the character's own mind. It can be their own guilt or conscience, or it can be their own fears. And it may entail a struggle to assimilate what moral or right choice is. Conflict happens when a character is battling or debating within their own selves, whether he or she will tell the truth or he or she will try to hide it. And it can be as simply as the character is experiencing a moral dilemma, or he or she is facing a difficult situation wherein he or she needs to choose within two possibilities, and it can be a right choice or a wrong choice. So if you have watched the movie entitled Tangled, it can be an example of this conflict, which is character versus self. Why it is considered as this conflict? Because in the story, Rapunzel thought and felt that her mother is trying to be selfish and controlling her. So she felt that way. So she left her mother and go far, far away and travel and travel and travel and let happiness eat her. But at the end of the story, she realized that her decision is wrong, because it is wrong to defy her mother's wishes, because we all know that mothers knows best, right? All her mother's decisions are for her. So at the end of the story here, she realized that. So she is thinking whether she will go back to her mother or she will stay at that moment. So take note that at the end of the story, when the character changes his own mind, his or her own mind, it is considered as character versus self, especially when it involves their own conscience or their guilt. So that is an example of the character versus self, because at the end of the story, Rapunzel changes her own mind and go back to her mother, because she surpassed her own inner struggle, which is the conscience. Okay? Okay, I guess we are done and clear with the first type of conflict, which is the character versus self. Let us move forward to the second type of conflict, which is the character versus character. So as you can see, I did not put any definitions here. Instead, I just put the statement stated that character versus character is a common type of conflict. Why? Because for me, I think it is a common type of conflict we encountered unconsciously in our daily life. This conflict happens when a person is trying to directly fight against one another, or it can be when a person is trying to stop another person or another character from reaching his or her goals. So I'll give you an example, situational example to be specific. When you saw a child arguing with another child, it is considered as character versus character, right? So another one is when you saw your brother and your sister fighting against each other, it is considered as character versus character. When you saw your pets, the dog and the cat, fighting against each other, it is considered as character versus character. I'll also give you an example of teleserye in Gemini 7. I really love this. The first Yaya. It involves Mr. Gabby Concepcion, Miss Lorraine. I don't know her real name or her screen name. Miss Sanya Lopez. Miss Sanya Lopez portrays the Yaya or the maid in the teleserye, and Miss Lorraine, she is together with Mr. Gabby Concepcion in politics. And Gabby Concepcion is the Mr. President. So Miss Lorraine and Miss Sanya Lopez or the Yaya Melody are fighting against each other because they both like Mr. President, who is Gabby Concepcion. So itong si Miss Lorraine is trying to stop Yaya Melody from reaching her goals. So this is considered as character versus character because they fight against each other. And there is the conflict because they both like Mr. Gabby Concepcion. Now, we are done with the two types of conflict, which are the character versus self and character versus character. So let's move on to the third type of conflict, which is the character versus nature. So in this third type of conflict, the character is set in opposition to nature, wherein he or she needs to surpass and overcome the things beyond their controls and the forces by nature. It includes the storms, the floods, animals which are wild, tornado, earthquakes, and epidemics. Epidemic includes the measles, cholera, um, dengue, malaria. So, also, I think COVID-19 is an example of this one. Considered ourselves as the character and COVID-19 as the nature because it is not controllable. Although we can save ourselves by staying at home, but when we are outside, we don't know if COVID is here or COVID is there, right? So it is uncontrollable. So I think COVID-19 is an example of this type of conflict. Consider ourselves as the character. So also, the movie is entitled Finding Nemo. They experience different struggles before they find Nemo, which is caused by ocean, nature. In Titanic, they sink, right? They sink. It is not controllable because it is forced by nature, by ocean, right? Also, Moana, when she returned the heart of Te Fiti and she saved her island from curse. In finding her way home, she faces many struggles, right? So it is considered as character versus nature because the things they face beyond their control. So take note and just keep in mind that in character versus nature, it is opposition with nature. So we are done with the character versus self, which is character versus his or her inner mind. Character versus character, which is the man versus man, or it can be man versus animal or animal versus animal. And the third one is the character versus nature, which is the opposition of the character is the nature. Okay?
Good day, everyone. Before we proceed with our discussion, let us first shake our hand like this. Come on, let's shake our hand. All right, thank you. So going back to our discussion, there are 6 types of conflict, and my groupmate already discussed the first 3 types of conflict, and those are character versus self, character versus character, and character versus nature. So now, I'm going to discuss the last 3 types of conflict. The 4th types of conflict is the character versus supernatural. So, what comes first in your mind when you first heard the word supernatural? So for me, what comes first in my mind when I first heard the word supernatural? It is about supernatural being like ghosts, monsters, aliens, like that. So when we say supernatural, it is caused by forces that cannot be explained by science. So when we say character versus supernatural, it is pitting characters against phenomena like ghosts, gods, monsters, raises the stakes of a conflict by creating an unequal playing field. So it means that the conflict arises from unnatural sources. So meaning, hindi siya normal. And character versus supernatural can be a struggle against supernatural being and can be a problem or fight with God. And it also occurs when a character faces resistance from a supernatural force such as fate, something that is unseen, magic, or other worldly beings like deities or gods. And sometimes, stories can be a little bit creepy, like the movie of The Conjuring. Maybe some of you are familiar with that movie. It is a horror movie. So, The Conjuring is a story of a young girl thought to be possessed by a demon inside their house. And the house they lived in is a haunted house, where the one who is haunting the house is an evil ghost. Evil ghost that they can see. So, the characters are fighting an evil ghost that they can see. So that is what we call character versus supernatural. The characters are fighting or pitting characters against supernatural being. Like what I said earlier, like ghosts, monsters, like that. So the 5th types of conflict is character versus technology. So when we say character versus technology, a character is in conflict with some kind of technology. And technology becomes too powerful or causes problem for a character or society. Like the movie of Matrix. Maybe some of you are familiar with that movie. So in the Matrix, it's basically a story where all the citizens are slave to this powerful system known as the Matrix, the technology, and they will eventually turn all the citizens into batteries that serves as a sole source of power. So there is only one man who can put this to rest, and he's known as the One, or other words, Neo, and he's the one who fulfilled the prophecy to defeat the Matrix, the technology in the film. So that is what we call the character versus technology. When technology becomes too powerful or causes a problem for a character or society. So the 6 types of conflict is the character versus society. So when we say character versus society, the characters may be motivated to take action against their society. And it can be a fight against the society in which the character lives. And also, the character, him or herself, is against whatever is going on or believed by society. So one great example of these types of conflict is the play of Romeo and Juliet. So maybe all of you are familiar with that play. In the play, Romeo and Juliet are constantly trying to escape the society around them. They attempt to give up their family names and social identities so they can be together and be free of their public responsibilities. Despite of their efforts to stay in secrecy and prolong the night, dawn is indefeatable. So in the end, Romeo and Juliet must separate eventually and cannot escape the public responsibilities of the public world. So Romeo tries to deny his father and refuse his name. And Juliet tries to prevent herself being married to Paris because she is already married to Romeo. So as their last resort, the lovers commit the act of eternal privacy and darkness by committing suicide. So that leads to a tragic end of the two lovers. And the conflict here is that society and their families are against with the characters. Society and their families are against with Romeo and Juliet. So that is what we call character versus society. And those are the types of conflict: the character versus self, character versus character, character versus nature, character versus supernatural, character versus technology, and character versus society.
Alright, so hi, at this moment we are going to talk about the irony. But first, what is irony? So irony is the expression of one's meaning by using language that normally signifies the opposite, typically for humorous or emphatic effect. Okay, so irony, for me, it deals with the expectation, and also it is the opposite of what is expected. So that is irony. Okay, so let's talk about the first 2 types of irony. We have here the dramatic irony. So dramatic irony is a form of irony that is expressed through a work structure. An audience awareness of the situation in which a work's character exists differs substantially from that of the characters in the words and the action of the characters, therefore take on a different, often contradictory meaning for the audience than they have for a work's characters. Okay, so this just means that dramatic irony, also known as the tragic irony. Okay, So this is when a writer lets a reader know something that a character does not. Okay, so to make it short and clear, okay, dramatic irony is when a reader understands more about the events of the story than the character. Okay, so dramatic irony means that the reader knows something that a character doesn't. Okay, let's have an example. Everyone thinks that Kyle is the fastest kid in the school, but we know he cheated in the race. Okay, so in that particular event, in that particular situation, so we know that Kyle cheated on the race, but the character in there, in the story, in that particular event, still thinks that Kyle is the fastest kid. Okay, and another is that we have here the comic irony. Okay? So comic irony is a literary technique or rhetorical device in which irony creates a humorous effect. Okay? Comic irony comes in many forms. It can be derived from ironic statements by characters or narrators in a work of fiction. So it can also arise from a situation presented in the work. Okay, let's have here. So comic irony can also be based on situational mistakes, okay, such as characters believing that Juliet has died when she hasn't. Okay, so that's one thing or one good example of the comic irony. So again, the comic irony deals with, or it is used to have a humorous effect in the particular story. Okay.
Situational irony. Situational irony is when unexpected outcomes is subverted. In simplest words, what happens is exactly the opposite of what we expected. We can actually see this in our real lives. It will be extremely boring if everything always turns out how we expected, right? But you may be thinking now, how do we know, or when can we know what to expect or when to expect? Well, you know it when you see it. In literature, situational irony is used as a curveball that you can throw to your audience that could cause a shocking twist. Who among you is fan in watching Korean dramas? I personally like them. Why? Because they bring excitement through the flow of the story, and I will never know what will happen next unless I see it. Let's say, for example, the Korean drama Memories. Dong Baek is a detective who has an extraordinary ability where he can peer into the memories of whoever he touches. In the drama, they are hunting a serial killer, and every time I think of this character is a killer, let's say the guy from the neighborhood, the next episode will tell me he was not. I suspected every single character on the drama, even the protagonist, but turns out at the end, it was actually his sister who has the same ability like him. They can see, manipulate, and erase memories. And Dong Baek actually did it himself. He erased his own memory. Another example is Harry Potter series, where Harry Potter is expected to kill Voldemort, but eventually he realizes he must allow Voldemort to kill him so the piece of soul of Voldemort will die. In the Sixth Sense, Cole can see dead people, and the audience finally figure out that Cole was actually dead in the end. Do we expect that to happen in those examples? Well, I wouldn't expect that. The second, our daily lives. Who would expect a firehouse or a fire station to burns down, where all the fire trucks and fire personnel were there. Right now, in this pandemic, I did not expect the doctors and nurses will die because of COVID, because I'm thinking they are the one who are curing it. Then supposedly, they are the one who are most protected. But I guess they are not. I have read one tweet of a medical frontliner that they only got tested 2 times in the past year. And come to think of it, the president's spokesperson got tested 35 times for the past year, for free. However, last is verbal irony. Verbal irony is when a speaker means something very different from what he or she is saying. What does verbal irony do? It brings humor to the situation. Sarcasm when you say, "Oh, fantastic!" but the situation is actually bad. Socratic way where you're pretending to be ignorant to show that someone is actually ignorant. I'm confused. I thought your curfew was 11. Isn't it 12 now? Another one is using irony as understatement, saying, "We don't just get along," about your friend who had a huge fight with. And of course, overstatement, saying, "I'll die if I can get that Red Velvet album." Well, I won't really die, but I'll be heartbroken. And that is the end of our lesson. Did you learn something? I hope you did. Let's go back to our objectives. Our first objective was to discuss and explain conflict and irony. Did we? Yes, we did! And the other one is to identify the different types of conflict and irony. Did we? Yes, of course! Thank you for listening. That's all for today. Happy learning!
You are my